The 10 Plagues of Egypt. Once upon a time in the land of Egypt, there was a powerful king known as Pharaoh. He ruled with an iron fist, and his heart was hard like stone. Pharaoh's people worshipped their gods and lived in luxury, but there were others in Egypt who lived as slaves. Among them were the Israelites, a group of people who had once prospered in Egypt, but had been forced into hard labor. One day, a man named Moses, who had been raised as an Egyptian prince but was born an Israelite, stood before Pharaoh. He had a message from the one true God, the God of Israel. "Let my people go." Pharaoh scoffed and said, "Who is this God that I should listen to him? I will not let your people go." Moses, feeling the weight of God's command, warned Pharaoh that if he did not let the Israelites go, Egypt would face terrible consequences. But Pharaoh's heart was hard and he refused to listen. And so, the stage was set for a series of events that would forever change Egypt. The first plague. Water turned to blood. Moses raised his staff over the Nile River, and at once the waters of Egypt turned to blood. Fish in the river died, and the stench filled the air. The Egyptians could not drink the water or bathe in it. Pharaoh's magicians tried to do the same, but they only made things worse. Yet Pharaoh remained stubborn. He refused to let the Israelites go. The second plague, frogs. The next morning, the land of Egypt was overrun with frogs. They were in the homes, the fields, and even the Pharaoh's palace. There were frogs everywhere, hopping and croaking, making life unbearable. The people cried out to Pharaoh to do something, and Moses prayed to God, who ordered the frogs to return to the river. Yet after the frogs were gone, Pharaoh hardened his heart again and refused to let the Israelites go. The third plague, gnats. Then came the gnats. Tiny biting insects swarmed through the air and landed on everything, crawling under the skin of the Egyptians and making them itch and suffer. Even Pharaoh's magicians were unable to replicate this plague. They confessed, "This is the finger of God," but Pharaoh's heart remained unmoved. The fourth plague, flies. A plague of flies filled the land, buzzing and swarming around the people. The flies were so thick that they covered every surface, and the stench of their presence was overwhelming. Pharaoh once again promised to release the Israelites if the flies were removed. But once the flies were gone, he broke his word and refused to let them go. The fifth plague, livestock disease. A disease struck the livestock of Egypt. Horses, donkeys, cattle, and sheep all fell ill and died. The Egyptians were devastated as their economy relied heavily on their animals. But in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, the livestock remained untouched. Even after witnessing this, Pharaoh's heart grew harder. The sixth plague, boils. Next came painful boils. Sores appeared on the skin of the Egyptians, causing great suffering. Pharaoh's magicians, who had been able to perform magic before, were now unable to even stand before Moses because of the boils. Yet Pharaoh's pride prevented him from letting the Israelites go. The seventh plague. Hail God sent a powerful storm of hail mixed with fire that rained down upon Egypt. The storm destroyed crops, shattered trees, and ruined everything in its path. But those who took shelter were spared. Pharaoh begged Moses to stop the hail and promised to let the Israelites go. But when the storm ceased, Pharaoh's resolve hardened once again. The eighth plague, locusts. The next plague brought swarms of locusts, which descended upon Egypt like a dark cloud. The locusts ate every remaining plant in the land, leaving Egypt barren and empty. Desperate, Pharaoh called for Moses and begged him to stop the destruction. But as soon as the locusts were gone, Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go. The ninth plague, darkness. For 3 days, an eerie darkness covered the land of Egypt. The Egyptians could not see each other or even move. It was a darkness so thick that it could be felt. The Israelites, however, had light in their homes. Pharaoh once again called for Moses, but after the darkness lifted, his heart remained unmoved. The 10th plague, death of the firstborn. Finally, God sent the most terrible plague of all. The firstborn of every Egyptian family, from the lowest servant to Pharaoh's own son, died in a single night. But the Israelites were spared, for they had marked their doorposts with the blood of a lamb, as Moses had instructed them. This was the sign that they were God's people. In the dead of night, Pharaoh, overwhelmed with grief, finally called for Moses. "Go," Pharaoh cried. "Take your people and leave Egypt. You have brought too much suffering to my land." And so the Israelites left Egypt, led by Moses, and began their journey to freedom. Epilogue. Even though Pharaoh had finally relented, his heart was still full of pride. Even after the Israelites had left, he sent his army after them, only to be swallowed by the Red Sea when Moses parted the waters. The Egyptians were left behind, and the Israelites were free at last. But the memory of the 10 plagues remained with them forever, a reminder of God's power and the cost of stubbornness. And from that day on, the Israelites celebrated their freedom every year, remembering the plagues and the great deliverance that had led them out of Egypt. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story. Thank you.